You need backup? How about the hero with the hardware? Here's a look at the brand new McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse, DC Rebirth, Cyborg. The pre-Flashpoint incarnation of Vic Stone was a star football player and all-around athlete. After he was mortally injured in a laboratory experiment gone wrong, his father turned him into a cyborg to save his life. This was the first of several transformations the young hero would undergo in his career. Stone hasn't seen many figures of him, so to get a new one now is pretty cool. Just before, of course, we get a closer look at the new DC Rebirth Cyborg, first I'd like to thank the folks over at McFarlane Toys that were kind enough to provide this sample we could have a look at. Cyborg's going to stand at about 7 inches in height. I say about, he's actually standing exactly 7 inches in height, and that translates to a figure that's 18 centimeters tall. Yeah, the only other Victor I really have in my collection is the one from the Justice League Snyder Cut. Though one is from the movie, one is from the comic, you can see that the two Victors are standing at about the same size to one another. Bring in some other characters as well. I wanted to stick kind of with the Galactic Guardians, if you are familiar with the Superpowers cartoon from like the late 80s. We have Superman, we have Firestorm, and of course we have to bring in Batman as well. All right, what do we got? Well, first what we have, fellas of mine, is the figure does come included with the display stand. If I just course correct the steering wheel, down below you can see there's the DC logo branded down below, and just off to the far corner of that, would you believe, there's a peg. You can see for yourself. That plugs into either one of Victor's boots. I guess if this is technically his body, that they're not so much his boots, they are his feet. Either way, though, he has two of them. He only has one peg. Choose wisely. Choose wisely. Stop that. Figure does also come included with a trading card. I like the look of the artwork here featured on the front. This is pulled from the pages of DC Rebirth. Not to necessarily mean that you have to be specifically assigning this figure to your DC Rebirth collection. I mean, this would be a perfect stand-in cyborg for my current Justice League collection. If we flip on the back of it, you can still see there's the same image. It's a little bit smaller. Or is it about the same size? Maybe it's about the same size. Doesn't really matter. What does matter, though, is his real name is Victor Stone. And what probably does also matter as well is there's a paragraph you can read for yourself. If you don't want to do any of that, I've already taken the liberty of reading it for you. I'm going to add that to the rest of my trading card sheets. Let's look at this next. It just so happens to be the only other accessory that comes included with Victor. The figure does come included with this giant arm cannon. It looks like something like Iron Man would have had in Marvel vs. Capcom, although he usually mounted on the top of his shoulder and just blast anyone in front of it. I tend not to play as Iron Man. I think he was way too cheap. Instead, I usually played as Cyclops and Ryu. I know, it's just as cheap. This does actually attach into his arm. The good thing about that, though, is when you're looking at the inside of the cavity, hello, you don't actually have to take the hand off. Now, you're going to have struggles more if you're trying to get this hand on here just because the thumb's sticking out. So it's a better idea, unless you really want to take the hand off, if you don't want to do that. You want to leave the arm on, the hand on, just because you're lazy. Well, you can easily just take the hand and fit it inside the cavity, and that sits on top of his arm. Because he also has a grip inside there, it means that the blaster isn't going to go anywhere. Now, again, if you wanted to, if you want to worry about losing tiny little hands, I mean, not that I would encourage you to do this, but you can also take the hand off. But it also, really, by having the hand there, it helps to hold the cannon in place. I suppose you could say that there's a handle here on the top. I suppose you could also say, too, because the figure does have a double hinge on the elbows, that you could really put the hand on the end of it. The one thing, though, I wish that the figure did also have, too, is that he could have maybe had a gripping hand. Because he has only really a gestured hand and not a gripping variety, there's nothing really that he can hold on to if you're looking to put the hand. Now, at the beginning of this review, Lady Luck just happened to be smiling down on me. I just bent the arm just a little bit, and I was able to make it look like he's actually holding the top of the handle. And you can pull that off somewhat successfully. Probably not to the point where he's blocking off his vision. I just wish, though, that they could have also included a gripping hand instead of just this hand here. Removing that, putting it off to the side. Yes, the figure doesn't have any swappable hands, so what you're basically being dealt with is one hand that's hold for gripping, or suitable for gripping, and then one, of course, that's going to be a dynamic hand. From a head sculpt standpoint, it certainly does look a lot like Cyborg. What a really cool looking figure it also is as well. Like, a lot of good sculpting. There's a lot of decent paint happening here as well. Of course, he's got the center stone here done in red, a matching color of that for his eye. There's a little pupil that you can also see is painted in white if I just get my blasted finger out of the way. There's a little bit of red down below here as well. That is the only other place that has the red other than this section and the sides on the section, of the sides of his torso, and down below here on the top of his thigh. The figure mostly is made here of black and silver. My guess is probably starting in a black plastic. My guess then is that they've also gone in there and painted it all with silver. The silver does a well enough job. I mean, even some of the areas where it would have looked a little rough on most figures, you can kind of buy into the idea that's a little coarser here around the shoulder pads just because, again, he's made of metal. Head sculpt, though, is fantastic on Victor here. Because, again, I only had the only other Victor in my collection was the Justice League Snyder Cut. I wasn't really going to be displaying that figure at all with the rest of my Justice League collection. This is going to be the guy that's going to be my stand-in for that. And I can't see really them doing a better-looking Cyborg, although I could really see them using this mold again. For the time and the effort of making this mold from scratch, you would think that they probably could double dip this and release this guy as probably a platinum edition, which I'm guessing right now is probably going to have some swappable arms, so you can probably have to take the hands off those, and he's probably going to come include with like some arm blasters or something of that sort. Probably not as elaborate as this, probably a little bit of a smaller size. But I'm calling it right now. I'm sure they're probably going to release a platinum edition of this guy. Maybe even a slight color variation of him as well. The molding, for the most part, is really good on this as well. I mean, there are a few areas that initially looking at it, I thought, oh, that a little bit of paint problems. But it actually looks like that's been sculpted on the back of his body deliberately like this. You can see as well, like the silver again looks more like it's just been brushed on lightly. So there's still a few little areas of black that are kind of peeking their way through. Normally, again, I would have criticized this, saying that, you know, some of the paint probably could have been done a little bit better. Maybe a second coat of paint could have gone a long way. But, you know, to be fair, being the fact that this is Cyborg, after all, I don't mind at all that there's some black of the plastic bleeding through. Now, of course, when you're looking at the bottom of the figure as well, I did mention that he had some red here and the red on the sides. He does technically also have, can't overlook the fact he's got some red triangles there on the fronts of his shins as well. Yeah, nice overall looking figure. Now, for his posability, I don't know why I felt the need to bring my finger in there. Head's going to be, first of all, on a ball joint. So it's going to allow the head to rotate all the way around. The head's going to look up only about that high, and it's going to look down about that low. The head does also rock back and forth as well. Now, the upper torso is going to be on a ball joint. Those familiar with DC Multiverse figures will already know what I'm about to say. Yes, he's got a ball joint at the base of his abdomen as well. For his shoulders, even though he has these shoulder pads, the shoulder pads are actually attached here, and they're not attached here. So when it comes to moving his arms out like this, they're not going to be in the way at all. The only problem that you may be facing, though, is when you're going to rotate the arm all the way around. That might be the time where they're going to be a little more hung up. At least this is softer plastic, just though be careful that this doesn't snap off. The figure does have a bicep swivel. Yes, he also does have a double hinge on the elbow. By the way, I just want to stop for a second and show you guys what the sculpting looks like on the inside of the hand. It kind of looks like he's got these repulsor blasts. Pretty cool looking hands. Get right in there. Get right in there. All right. Hands rotate all the way around. Again, you've got the legs that split. Now, the top half here is actually made of a softer plastic. It does leave a little bit to the gappage there. So, I mean, if you're looking at it from the front, you really wouldn't notice it. I mean, if you're looking at it from the top, you may notice that there's a little bit of a gap space between the abdomen and his trunks. But that allows just for a little more freedom to the abdomen. It doesn't really bother me at all. The legs do split out. You can take the legs and move forward. You can move them back. The figure does have a decent swivel there on the top of the thigh. As well, he has a decent double hinge in his knee. Articulation back and forth for his feet. They also rock back and forth this way. And the figure does have, of course, toe articulation there as well. Good looking Victor. I have to say, like, he was one of those figures really, like, collecting and building the way that I have my setup at least. I kind of build a lot of it kind of based on what I was more familiar with Justice League. For a long time, I was kind of, especially with Firestorm. Firestorm was kind of the one that really got me started with kind of wanting to build up my dioramas, or building up at least my collection shelves to kind of look again like the Galactic Guardians. Because, again, I have so many of these Supermans, I just end up having a Superman on display with Firestorm. But that's probably where I'm going to end up putting Cyborg. Not that he's not just a regular member of Justice League, but the fact that he was also in Galactic Guardians and he also got himself a Superpowers release back in the day might end up just displaying the figure along with that. Now, again, when going back to looking at his accessories, we do have the large-looking cannon. The cannon probably could have had just a little bit of paint given to the front of it, maybe a little bit of blue, for example, just look like he's about to fire this off. But the fact he gets himself a very large cannon like this is a nice touch. And I also appreciate the fact that you don't have to worry about removing hands. The moment you start to remove anything on figures is then the likelihood, ... that you're going to then lose a hand because you're going to put it to the side. I've done this. I'm guilty of this myself. You put the hand to the side because you're like, okay, I'm going to put this on. And then later on, you're like, where's the hand? Where's the hand? You're screaming upstairs. Where's the hand? Nobody's listening to you at all. This one, at least, you don't have to worry about removing hands. This is just, again, a case of sliding it up up the forearm. And again, I would imagine that they're probably going to take that same idea of adding things onto the end of his arms. If not for right now, the figure will, I'm sure, eventually down the road be released as a Platinum Edition or a McFarlane Collector's Edition, where I'm sure they're probably going to slightly tweak the paint just a little bit and give him different arm attachments that aren't part of this release. Or, nobody's saying really, by the way, that you have to have the arm cannon attached onto the Invictus forearm. If you'd rather instead flip that big gun around so it looks like now he's got a big blasting bazooka on his shoulder, kablamo! The way that the gun is molded and the way it's configured doesn't look like it has to go one way. The thing about it, though, is with the handle now being on the bottom instead of the top, he can actually hold it, and it looks like it's got a little sight underneath. I know what you're thinking. Well, now you've got a hole on the front of it. Well, where is it going to blast out from? I'm going to see even if I can find a blast effect that can sit inside that hole, so it looks like he's actually firing something. Now, he only unfortunately has one gripping hand. If anything, you could say that those were the hands he was dealt with. Hello? Hello? No, 3 of you left over that one. So if you do want to have it in this configuration, he only can have the means to hold it on one side. And technically, if you want to keep all his hands in place without having to worry about losing any of them, really the gun also belongs on that side of his body. You want to start yanking off hands, you want to start losing hands, by all means. I guess you could really put the gun on either side of his body. But again, like looking at this guy from head to toe, boy, he's a perfect looking cyborg. I don't know if there's anything I would have done differently to this figure. Yes, the paint in some of the areas for the silver probably could have maybe used a second coat of it, but considering, again, who the character we're talking about, we're not really necessarily looking at a Superman or a Batman where you can look at the paint and say, you know, I don't know, it could have probably used another coat of it. With Cyborg kind of having roughed up metal, I don't mind it, again, the idea that a little bit of the black is kind of bleeding through. The head sculpt is good, and that's the most important thing, and the paint for what we get of it is nicely done. Yeah, I'm really, really happy with how this one turned out. What do you guys think of DC Rebirth Cyborg? Let me know down below in the comment section. Is this the Cyborg you have been waiting for? And is this one you're going to be adding to your collection? I'd like to again thank the folks over at McFarlane Toys that were kind enough to provide the sample of the DC Rebirth Cyborg that we had the chance to have a look at in this review. If you guys did like this video, why don't you do a solid, throw it a like. You guys want to stick around for more so? I hope so. For all the people that are still in this room, and for the people that left the room after I talked about, I want to bring it up again. But just know, though, if you guys want to stick around for more, hit the subscribe, turn on that bell, and of course, come back. As always, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.